story we never hear about. We never hear about the Micronesians. I mean, this was news to me. And so you're currently a visual journalist and a filmmaker. You're based in Brooklyn, and but you were in the Peace Corps over there. So talk about how that influenced your making this film.
Sure. Basically, I did the Peace Corps to kind of have a long immersive experience outside of the U.S. and ended up being sent to Micronesia pretty randomly. And my job there was historic preservation. So basically, these islands have had waves of colonization of colonial powers come through, and they've lost a lot of their traditional oral histories and legends. So I was sort of tasked for 2 years to go around and using still photography and a little bit of video, document cultural events. So in some ways, my interest in this kind of telling stories through moving images started then. It was really a fun job to do for 2 years. And then I was sort of watching people be recruited and leave for the military and then come back sort of transformed by that experience. So I think the sort of kernel of an idea that led to the film was just wondering about what that's like to go from one of the smallest, kind of most distant islands in the world to war and back again, sort of in a human scale. Mm-hmm. And then I think returning to the U.S. and realizing how oblivious people here are of sort of how recruitment works, and that these people who are not Americans are serving and dying for us. It felt like an important story to try to tell. I think one thing that's not really addressed in the film, but we just got back from a film festival in Hawaii, and in Hawaii and Guam, Micronesians are this very stigmatized population. They're like the new immigrant group. Mm-hmm. So they're targeted, they're sort of criticized on media. And there's something, to me, extra offensive that on a day like today, on a day we observe Veterans Day, a Micronesian veteran who's done multiple tours of war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan could be in America and could be facing racism basically because he's Micronesian in these places, because there's just a lack of education around their place and the relationship of Micronesia to the U.S. So it feels like a bit of a gray zone, or Americans don't really understand what that relationship's about and that they have been. I mean, one thing to kind of understand about the recruitment is, it's like the best and the brightest, like the valedictorians are going off. And what does that mean for these small island nations if their sort of future leaders are all on the front lines of war? I mean, I think it's something they're going to sort of deal with in the future, but I feel like that's another kind of level of it.
For us as filmmakers, it was a difficult process to find the funding to go out and film because the islands are so remote. But for the soldiers, that's kind of the primary reason that the benefits are they're in such a difficult situation with the health benefits, is that they ostensibly receive the same sorts of health benefits as any other veterans coming out of the military. But the hospital is only the proper hospitals where you would get treated for, a missing limb or for PTSD only exist in Guam or Hawaii. So they have to pay out of pocket thousands of dollars to fly themselves to these hospitals. So even though they're supposedly getting the same benefits, in reality, they really aren't. So the choice for many of these soldiers is either stay in Hawaii or Guam, where they face a lot of discrimination and aren't able to go back home, or go back home to a tiny island like Koshrai and not be able to receive those same benefits. So it's a tough choice for them. And so the push, hopefully, is to provide greater infrastructure out there on the islands, or for the VA or the military to provide for travel to fly them out. Because a U.S. citizen soldier, the military will fly you out to whatever medical facility you need to go to. And that's not provided for the Micronesian citizens.
So the question was, she's wondering about how they shot in Afghanistan.
So in order to get that access, I applied to the military. We applied to the military with a treatment, a trailer. They kind of reviewed it. And I think the reason, talking to someone about this, the person I was talking to, we had a phone call, and he's like, usually we blow people like you off because we're not sure you're going to finish the film. You don't really have like a budget. You've never made anything. It doesn't seem like you know what you're doing. But they were like, this is kind of interesting. Like the guy I was talking to at least didn't know about the story, and he's like, why are they joining? I think he genuinely
wanted to know.
Yeah, and it was lucky to get that guy. So yeah, then it was a lot of like waiting around, and then they emailed me and they're like, you have 2 weeks and that you need to be in Kabul, and you have to get yourself to this NATO like military base. And I just like scrambled and bought body armor and went to Afghanistan. And it was like, I mean, honestly, it was a lot of boredom. It was a lot of like sitting around in like hot tents. What was hard was a lot of it was hard to film. It wasn't like cinematic. It was like, or it was like being in the tanks. Like the scariest thing was just hearing the guys' voices when they were scared, and like being like, okay, if these guys are scared, I should be terrified because they like really know what they're doing.
Just going through hours and hours of these guys kind of shooting the shit on these day-long, journeys out where they're just like stuck in this claustrophobic little vehicle. And that actually turned out to be some of the most revealing footage that we have, was just the audio of their conversations. Because, when Nathan's filming with a camera there, they're kind of, people are more aware that they're being captured, but after hours and hours and hours of just talking about everything possible just to like fill the time, a lot of their thoughts and feelings really came out. So
Price of spam.
yeah, about spam and their stereotypes of what the Pacific Islands are like. So our attempt in the film was to kind of show that long, compressing it, of course, but showing that long process of going out there, of them bonding, and really the Micronesian soldiers finding true connections with their comrades in a way to illustrate what it's like to actually be out there fighting on the front lines. And yeah.
How do you get such intimate access to the family and the community?
I mean, the answer is the Peace Corps. That I lived in the community for 2 years, spoke the language, was at every community feast, joined like a choir, was just like in deep. And then, when I initially showed back up with a camera, it's like my job had been driving around the island, documenting things. They're like, oh, Nathan's back to do more of what he's been doing for 2 years anyway. I hadn't met Marianne before. I met her 2 days after the funeral of her son. So that relationship, I think, was predicated on kind of the deal in Kosher Eyes that everyone knows everyone, that like you're related to everyone somehow. And I'd lived with his family, so like through that family, I was like in her sort of like, I was connected to her because you're connected to anyone. And in terms of kind of the process and collaborating with them on the filmmaking, but by and large, I mean, I think we're really lucky in the sense that the Micronesian community has been extremely supportive of the film. Because there's so little media representation, there's like a real eagerness to have this story told. And we did a Kickstarter and a lot of Micronesian veterans and not veterans threw in money. So while we didn't like collaboratively like edit with any of the characters just because the distance is too great, I think we felt a sense of their blessing and that the story was something that they really wanted told.